Training apex-level hypnotherapists and psychotherapists since 1988, the Institute for Psychosystems Analysis is now accepting applications for CADA 3 of our professional training course, taught online by Steve, Pauline and myself. If you resonate with the material on Young to Live By and believe that your calling is to be a therapist, then check out the link to our course webpage in the description. We look forward to welcoming you on board in June of this year, 2021.
If Carl Jung was on Twitter, I doubt he'd have INTP in his Freud, ENTP.
Yes, I think
Aquarius.
he might kick you down the stairs
Yes,
for that, as he was prone to do with some people.
Why would you limit yourself to being just a thinking type? Obviously, I'm definitely a thinking type.
Yeah.
Try to balance it with feeling ongoing, which is, can be difficult. But why would you want to limit yourself? Because you're limiting your potential as a human being.
Yeah. Fine with people who are into Myers-Briggs, and if they happen to be an INTP or an INTJ, then they will use the Myers-Briggs as a justification for saying, oh, I'm just like Jung. Jung was an INTP or Jung was an INTJ. And that's part of this fantasy attachment to Jung's image, that you can somehow be like him because you're the same type.
Hi everyone, we recently got a question from one of our viewers, and it goes as such. It seems to me that the individuation process is heavily based on dealing with our aspects which are hidden in the unconscious and in some sense our weaknesses. The Myers-Briggs test is a psychometrical method on categorizing oneself by personality type. Could you say then that oneself should aim on improving the opposite? For example, an ENFP should focus on improving their ISTJ side. Which type of profession should oneself aim for to assist your individuation process in the most successful way? Should it be one, therefore, that improves your weaknesses or your strengths? What do you guys reckon?
I can come at this from what will probably seem to be a blasphemous direction, shall we say, and a blasphemous suggestion as well to those people who are into typology. Junk the Myers-Briggs completely for self-development, because it's an abstraction out from its original context, which is Jung's work. If you have a broader Jungian base, you'll see exactly what I mean, that it's far too limited. So just to give you an indication on that, Collected Works 8, not 6, which is psychological type. So I recommend you go to Collected Works 8 and check out how Jung discusses typology there and the functions. From his perspective, and this is the absolute core of Jung's model, the so-called functions are all to do with consciousness. There is no unconscious type. There is no unconscious type. If you presume to project back into yourself a mirror image of your so-called Myers-Briggs type, for example, all you're doing is creating a mirage which reflects like a flashlight into a mirror back to yourself in the form of an opposite. But it's not there. It's an ego fantasy, it's an ego projection. All of those functions are meant to be available to consciousness. They're not unconscious as such, or at least they are not the unconscious. You can say that a certain function might be unconscious in the sense that it's not used and therefore is outside of conscious will and intentionality. That's completely different from saying that it is unconscious as such. That's not the case. It's more latent. It's not used directly by consciousness. But you'll find it is used, because all of these functions are part of a suite of options, of adaptations to the world. And again, look up Carl Jung and Collected Works 8 on the functions, and you'll see that that's the case. So that's the first thing I would do, is say just junk Myers-Briggs, even though we will use it on occasion. And that simply is a kind of null hypothesis that we have to reject. In other words, we pressure test that against the reality of another human being rather than follow it. If you pressure test it and you see where it fails, then the reality of a person emerges from behind. Here's another thing to consider with respect to that. the Myers-Briggs original configuration, the way that they originally broke it down, the stack of functions, and this is the way that we used to use it in the 1980s, the Myers-Briggs, for example, was based on a line from Collected Works 6 that Briggs and Myers took as being justification for the way that they organised their stack, which has to do with the auxiliary, the tertiary and the inferior function being different in every way from the dominant one. That meant therefore that, as in James's case, if he reports habitually as being an INTP, the other three functions are all necessarily extroverted. They took it from that, and now they've reversed it and they've turned it into a nice neat mirror image, which suits the way people like to think about Jungian ideas as little nested sets of opposites. So what was wrong with the Myers-Briggs originally then? That for decades they worked on that, and they did most of their statistical evaluation based on the fact that the three functions that were not dominant were in the opposite attitude to that of consciousness. Was that wrong all along? Why would you have any confidence in it now, in it being that way? So that's one thing. Another thing is it's not the original Jungian personality type test. That's the Gray-Wheelwright test, which is available online for free. You can get it, you can download it, you can download the manual connected with it. Now in that, for example, James would be called an IUT. They substitute N for U. U is intuition. And what they would say on that is that he would be introverted, and that both intuition and thinking are introverted, not in the opposite attitude. A completely different way of looking at things again. Gives you a very, very different perspective on things. Again, you'll find with people who are into Myers-Briggs, and if they happen to be an INTP or an INTJ, then they will use the Myers-Briggs as a justification for saying, oh, I'm just like Jung. Jung was an INTP, or Jung was an INTJ. And that's part of this fantasy attachment to Jung's image, that you can somehow be like him because you're the same type. But the Gray-Wheelwright test suggests that that's not the case. Jung was very different. He was an introvert with both his thinking and his intuition. Then you have to think about Jung and what was his attitude, so to speak, towards tests. Well, he never used them. He knew the Wheelwrights, Joe and Jane Wheelwright, who were involved in the Gray-Wheelwright test. He knew them very, very well. They were personal students of his. He personally qualified them. But he didn't use the test. Briggs and Myers were not Jungian analysts. They abstracted something out from psychological types to develop what became a commercial test, which itself has reversed some of its basic precepts. How can you have any confidence in that? If you're going to use typology, go back to Jung himself and see how he conceived of it. What was the reason why he put his type theory together? How did he apply it to himself? What did he say about himself in relation to it? And then you'll find that the Gray-Wheelwright is closer, it's far closer to Jung's original model than the Myers-Briggs or any of the derivations that have grown out from Myers-Briggs. It's gotten ridiculous now, hasn't it? It's a huge abstraction, miles away from reality.
Yeah.
It's like some kind of reading of tea leaves or astrology in its worst sense.
Yeah.
And it's become massively commercialised. Typology.
Well, if you have something like 57 different variables, and that's 57 different opportunities you have to fit your model to somebody who's coming in.
Yeah.
So on the surface, it could be very difficult to argue because it's like, oh, my model predicts everything there is to say about you. So the simpler the model is, the better the model is.
Absolutely.
In that case, because otherwise, you're not going to match it to the person simply because that's how they are presenting.
Yeah.
And in which case does it have predictive capacity, realistic predictive capacity? And one of the things with these modern MBTI things is because they put someone into like a little box, it becomes a little prophecy.
Yeah.
So there's a part of it, there could be a little bit of argument here, but part of it is this is the way you're going to be forever and you can't develop. But if you develop, that's you getting in touch with your inferior function. Now we're into the types of the unconscious. And this is where things are weird and they will flip and they will change, and then it loses all predictive capacity.
It does.
If you want to be scientific or forensic about it, it has to be predictive. Otherwise, someone would just throw it completely in the bin. There's no point otherwise. Absolutely,
totally agree with that. So you should be able to see then that there's absolutely no point in putting yourself into a construct which is a construct of a construct of a construct, like a photocopy that's been refotocopied and refotocopied. The distortions just magnify. with each attempt to update that very reductive approach to looking at things. Jung never intended his type theory to be used out of a much wider context. Our clinical experience has shown that's so essential. That when you work with somebody, type is only an indication on the surface of how somebody's presenting in the moment. It's not an indication of the unconscious at all. There is no indication of the unconscious. It's only an indication of how someone is in the moment in relation to you. And this is one of the reasons why the Myers-Briggs has very poor test-retest validity. Because people change. Mm. They're intended to change, they're supposed to change, you're supposed to change. So in that sense, I would look at other things, include type theory broadly, in a very superficial sort of sense, but have something in you that kicks against it. Some reflexivity which says, oh come on, this is just too much. This is a ridiculous reductionism and doesn't explain anything outside of itself. It's theory-laden. The best of Jung's ideas are not theory-laden. They translate well, they go into other cultures and can explain things there. But typology doesn't travel well. You're told that it does, but it doesn't. It doesn't even mix with, in a co-predictive way with things like Big Five, which, you know, somebody who pushes that an awful lot, who purports to be influenced by Jung, but he never uses the Myers-Briggs. There's a reason for that. I mean, you know, you need to consider it before you lock yourself into this this fiction that is typology as is being pushed at the moment on the internet.
Mm. So in this guy's question where he's saying if you're an ENFP you should get in touch with the ISTJ side, you could say that that's the case from, say, the model's point of view, or you could say the different cognitive functions are a suite of options, and to get in touch with what colloquially is called the ISTJ side is just using your full all of you to the highest potential that you possibly can.
Yeah.
Like, why would you limit yourself to being just a thinking type? Obviously, I'm definitely a thinking type.
Yeah.
Trying to balance it with feeling ongoing, but which is, you know, can be difficult. But why would you want to limit yourself? Because then you're limiting your potential as a human being.
Yeah.
The prophecy stuff with the Myers-Briggs stuff is... people cluster together with it as well. This is something else that you see. They join forums and they share memes. It's like, oh, this is my introverted intuition. This is why I'm paranoid. And it's like, so you're going to keep yourself there, are you, forever? And
well, if you want to put yourself in a box, just turn to horoscopes.
That's true. Yeah.
That would do the job nicely there. And with respect to encouraging somebody to just flip and to develop, you know, their completely opposite type, I mean, what kind of task is that for a start? I mean, if you're an ENFP trying to be an ISTJ, make sure you're a good ENFP first before you even look at ISTJ. Yeah. Because there may be all sorts of reasons why you may not be performing as, you know, as well or as optimally as you might do as an ENFP. I think the thing to do is to have some understanding of difference, of what it means to be different, and that's where it becomes useful, because then you can use it as a tool to relate better. So that if you're capable of modelling somebody else's approach, rather than taking it on and suggesting to yourself that you're somehow becoming that thing, then I think that's enough in and of itself. Because it gives you a perspective, as I think Steve was suggesting. It gives you another lens, a different way of looking at a particular problem or situation or relationship. And to be honest, I think that's about as good as it gets. Mm-hmm. And you certainly don't need to have or limit yourself or anybody else to a 4-letter code to be able to do that. No. It's enough to simply know. And I think we do see these functions empirically. And we do see the attitudes of introversion and extroversion. They do appear to exist. Yeah. But you need to be very flexible about how you use them, and you should always do it in the context of the person that you're working with. Yeah. So I think that's the best you can hope for, really, with respect to typology and type theory, is to have some broad understanding of what we're looking at, to say that it does appear to have some predictability in terms of how people relate to one another, and therefore either get on or don't get on with somebody else. But, you know, it's... I think to just create a system which is so self-limiting, and to try and stick with that and not look at the bigger picture, not look at other ways of explaining things, is a huge mistake.
To take. I like what you're saying about relating in that sense.
Yeah.
You can say that there is a thing about, say, INTPs in particular. It's like, the world doesn't understand me because I'm just blunt. It's just the way I am.
Yeah.
Or an INFJ, one of them is, the world doesn't understand me. I'm just so introverted and in my own head.
Yes.
And it's like, you've literally just, because of the type theory, you've captured potential immediately. And
Yes.
you've even in like a simple sense, the opportunities that are going to present you in the world. So even in like a persona sense, it's one thing you're pointing out, Pauline. You can model the other types. You don't have to sincerely flip your type.
No, you don't.
And it's like, that's relating.
Yes,
And you
it
can link
is.
to somebody else. It's obviously
Exactly.
essential to do as a therapist, to model their way of
That's
the world
right.
in any social relationship at all. Because
Yes.
if you just walk around with, say, the idea that you're an INFJ on the inside and therefore you can just be completely introverted and disappear off, you're going to cap every moment to moment. You're capping all of the potential and the goodness you can reap in the world around you.
That's so true.
And it's like, that's a heap of bloody nonsense to me.
It
Absolute
is.
nonsense.
It is. It is. And for those people who follow Jung and believe in Jung's ideas, and then we should be going back to the source.
Absolutely.
We should be looking at what he said to do. And you don't get these limitations, these structures in Jung's theory about typology. And it's liberating, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not saying you shouldn't be informed about the MBTI. I mean, I think probably you should be, and how people use these categories to describe themselves and others. By all means, learn about it, but don't be straitjacketed by it either. And always go back to original sources, and you can find out what the man himself really thought about these things, as opposed to something which has largely just become a commercial venture. Anyway.
Yeah, if Carl Jung was on Twitter, I doubt he'd have INTP in it. Freud, ENTP.
Yes, I think
Aquarius.
he might kick you down the stairs
Yes,
with that, as he was prone to do with some people.
He was,
Based.
Yes, yeah. So yes, use it, but just be careful how you use it.
Yeah, the unconscious has no type.
No, he says that himself.
He does. They're faculties. These functions are faculties of consciousness. And as we say here, there are a suite of options, and you can choose which one you want to use. You do use them all, you're just perhaps not habitually aware of it.
Yes.
And you might have a particular angle of orientation towards one or two of them.
Yeah.
But don't fall for the Myers-Briggs trap or any of these pop internet gurus who try to exploit people and reduce everything down to that. You'll find they have to invent a mythology to support it. The configurations that they invent become mythologized. They internalize mythological names, they imbue them with some kind of magical power because of the name, and then they attach that to a type configuration. All of that is beguiling, it's inductive, it's almost hypnotic as well. And guess what? It's all wrong as well. The real world isn't like that.
Well, it almost becomes an occult practice.
It does, yeah.
Like as I suggested before, you look at your horoscope, or you go to a tarot card reader, and they'll give you a spread and tell you this is who you are, and this is your life's trajectory, and so on. It starts to go in that direction if you're not careful.
Yeah, very, very rapidly.
Yeah.
So if you want to grow and you want to develop, do the personal myth, uncover your instincts, live truthfully and honestly by them, and you'll find that things like neuroses just fade and fall away, because you'll be in touch with your core, with your centre, whatever you want to call that, including your Jungian self-archetype if you wish, and you will fulfil your lifespans, adaptation stages as and when they should be fulfilled. But if you displace into something like this, which is superstitious, frankly, you're just going to tie yourself up in knots. And years later, you'll look back when you eventually wake up and wonder, why the hell did I get involved with that nonsense?
Yeah. And you'll use it to abuse people if you're not careful.
Others as well, yeah.
As a stick to beat other people with. Well, you're not like me, you don't understand where I'm coming from, blah, blah, blah. And it can be weaponised. We've seen that happen a lot, haven't we?
Yeah.
If you're looking to take your study of depth psychology and personal development to the next level, using Steve and Pauline's 40-year-long clinical experience as your personal guide, then make sure you check out Jung to Live By's flagship offering, Discover Your Personal Myth Ultimate Handbook. For anyone who has a calling deep in their very genome to become who they truly feel they should be, this guide is utterly indispensable. Pick up your copy today and make 2021 the year you truly begin to become yourself.